Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about principles of learning. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, would you say that you have to follow the same set of principles to improve as a software engineer, irrespective of your age? Well, yeah, age, like the at least my try and true method for learning is irrespective of age, and I mean it's not my concept. It's the basic principle is learn by doing as much as humanly possible. As I've said in other videos, I firmly believe that having a theoretical understanding is important. That's one part of it. But it's also, you can never underestimate the fact that you have to have both the mental picture of what you're trying to accomplish. This is especially true for more theoretical subjects where, like, let's take mathematics as an example, or machine learning or something like that. You really need to know the theory behind some stuff, because it's very hard for you to do that other thing that is very important, which is trying and observing, like just the scientific method. You simply try things, observe what happens, make some learn deductions based on that, or hypotheses, and repeat that process until you sort of understand the motion. And so I usually preach that it's very important for you to start by getting like a basic theoretical understanding, like watch some tutorials or whatever, so you sort of understand what's going on, and then go and start making small experiments, experiment over and over and over and over, small projects, until they become more and more complicated, until things starts to fall in place for you. That doesn't really change. It doesn't really matter how old you are, because that method is probably, I mean, it is the way humans learn. They're so those those principles are pretty broad. I mean, I'm sure that there are people out there who will give you like top 10 tips to take good notes, or like how to learn everything in one read through, and like all of this sort of stuff. From what I can see, usually these sorts of things are bullshit. They are helpful steps that you can take in order to achieve the thing that I basically chalk down to an unknown. Because if the second humanity figures out how to permanently embed experiences into people, or like the same, teaching people in one iteration the same thing a person usually learns in 100 or 1,000 iterations. When we get to that point, the entire way like our society would pretty much change, like immediately. I would say, like, you would see a completely different species. But right now we don't know how that is achieved, so we try to figure out how to do that. The thing that I will say, though, that might differ is not so much that, like, the principles behind how to improve as a software engineer doesn't change with age, but it does change with seniority. And seniority and age are not exclusive, or like they're not the same thing. So as a junior software developer, the principles that I've just stated to you are going to be pretty much, I would argue, the thing that you should focus on. Understand the theory, iterate, experiment, etc., etc. The problem is that the higher up you get, like, that principle is always going to be a foundation layer for anything you want to learn in terms of when it's a new tool or a new technology or something like that. Like these sorts of very focused areas, these are very applicable for this sort of thing. But there is something that is very, very difficult to achieve with this method, and that is to understand the broader picture of things. Because as you grow in seniority, more emphasis is going to be, your emphasis in terms of what you are doing and the value that you bring to an organization or to an employer or so forth, depending on employer now, of course. But as your role expands, you spend less time on just coding and just learning a new tool. The tools are a mean to achieve some goal. Now, for a junior software developer, the goal is practically always the same. Their responsibility starts and ends with being able to achieve the story card scope. That's usually how it goes. That's not true for the real seniors. They are the people who usually, like, they are not just trying to achieve the scope of the story. They're trying to achieve success for the company. That requires a much broader way of thinking. You're basically the person who writes some of the stories, and in many cases you don't have someone telling you how to do something or what exactly it is they are looking for. You have to have a holistic understanding of all the things in order to be able to figure out what the right move is. It's it's sort of like the military. The soldier's job is to follow orders and execute effectively. So they have a sort of like a limited scope in comparison to maybe the general has to set up the entire battle plan or like the tactics and so forth. Their roles are important, but the focuses are very different. And so in order for you to improve in this area, you have to start to go less into this sort of these principles I was talking to about, and more into basically self-reflection. That's the main principle that you're going to change. You need to understand what you are doing, why you are doing it, how all the pieces fit together, and all the people that make up your sphere of influence. How do all these pieces move as a system? And I'm not just talking about code now. I'm talking about the entire organization, because the code that you write will very much depend on what type of organization you're dealing with, because you can't write the same software, the same, which is sort of the thing that you probably heard if you've heard people say things like what works for Google doesn't necessarily work for your organization, etc., etc. Because as with a carpenter or someone, a construction, like an architect won't build the same building for every single client, because each client is a little bit different and they might have different requirements on the building that they are designing. Such as with most products, it's the same thing for you as a software developer. And so when you get to that level, more of a holistic understanding is necessary, and you can't really do that in any other way than to basically put yourself in a position where you're basically it's experience. That's what it comes down to. You've reached a point now where you know your foundations so well that now it's time to start thinking about, all right, how can I take on roles or projects that forces me to use the foundation tools, like all the technologies that I know and so forth, in a new and creative way. Because it is through that next level that you will start to understand how to actually leverage the things that you sort of learned. Because as a junior software developer, you probably can't really figure out how the story that you are working on, how does that fit into the overall framework of what the company is trying to achieve, and how should you, will you be able to spot an important improvement in this area? Probably not as a junior, but as a senior, you will have, in order for you to improve, these are the sorts of things that you are going to have to start looking at, because it is that creative usage of all the things that you have learned that is going to take you to the level where you start to understand how everything fits together as a whole. So what I want you to take away from this is that at least my principles for learning are always going to be the same. You need to have a basic at the very least. Like your theory is always important. It depends depending on how theoretical the subject is. I mean, some subjects are all theory, so that's what it comes down to. That's one part of it. The other part is that you need to have hands-on experience. An example would be if you want to learn mathematics, even though it is mostly theoretical, solving problems over and over will embed the understanding of how the formulas work or how the different theories work. So practice makes perfect. So both of these things are necessary. So iteration on projects is going to stay true regardless of if you're if you're a teenager, if you're a middle-aged guy or girl. Like if you're middle-aged, it doesn't really matter what age you are. The thing that does matter usually, where the principles starts to change, is when you get to seniority, because most of what you do up until the mid-level sort of ish, and some people stay here forever, like the people who never really break into true seniority, they will stay here because the way that they work as people, like their way that their minds work, is that their focus is on delivering the story. That's not going to fly if you want to be an architect, or if you want to be a technical leader of some sort, or like a staff engineer or a principal engineer, or like whatever. When you get to the higher levels and you're basically in charge of leading people, and you're in charge of basically assuring success for the company, then the next level, like the principles change a little bit, because now you have to basically put yourself in, you have to put yourself out there a little bit. You have to put yourself in situations where you don't really know exactly how this thing is going to work. You can't just experiment with this thing, because the scope of the thing you're trying to do might be much too big. And at that point, the only thing you really have is your gut feeling and sort of how can I maneuver, and like some hopefully tried and true principles about how to write software. And it is through that process, putting yourself in those sorts of situations where you don't really have like a finite, very well defined scope of what you're going to do, that's going to bring it into the next level, because now you need to creatively think about all the things you have learned. In a way, you can think about it as a little bit as someone who goes to, like an engineer who goes to engineering school. Like the first course, like the first objective for you as a student is to just pass this, like the grades, to get your, like to pass the courses, right? But when you truly understand the things that the courses have taught you, the next thing is to now, okay, I have all these tools. What am I going to do with this stuff? Like, how am I going to use this to invent something, or how am I going to use this in order to do something else? That's the creative part. That's the thing that becomes more and more important the more seniority you get. Have a great day.